This is Talks, where people speak to people about crafting brands and the power of storytelling. Sonya, we are going to discuss food as a thematic area, both from a branding point of view, from a supply chain point of view, the impact on the environment, and also the engagement of the community as a whole. But let me start. Obviously, we're marketeers, so we always look at branding first and foremost. We look at the macro environment, and the food brand obviously looks and is very participative in the macro environment. What are the core values that, in your opinion, in your various roles that you occupy, should the food brand occupy in terms of sustainability?
There are many layers to the question. Let me start by, when you speak about the macro environment, my understanding is that it is the operating landscape, so to speak, around the company. So in my view, the brand is what communicates. So it is the central focal point that companies use, and rightly so, in order to establish a long-lasting relationship with their customers, which is, after all, what sustainability is all about. Again, when I think about a brand, I think it's one of the most precious assets that a company has. In fact, you can lose your property, your buildings, your machinery and everything, but if you retain the brand, then you retain the full value. And the value of a brand is important across, obviously, all types of companies and enterprises, but especially so when it comes to food, because food is very central to us as humans, not just as, obviously, as consumers, because it touches, again, key aspects and key areas of our lives, like survival, because we eat to survive, health, because it is bound intimately to our well-being, our nutrition, and so on, and our functioning. But it also is a central part of our celebrations, our pleasure, so another aspect. And then you ask about core values. When I think about the word value, the first element that comes to mind is trust. And again, to me, even though I am not in the marketing sphere, the core value of a brand is that it can deliver on its promise. It's a promise to consumers. This is what I can give you.
It's living up to its purpose, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So it has to be trustworthy. I think that really embodies what a brand is. And then if you link it to how can it be trustworthy in terms of sustainability, then we go into, obviously, the different dimensions of sustainability. And people are familiar nowadays, because it is not a modern concept, with the financial, environmental, and social aspects of sustainability. But again, in our message, we always say that to us as humans, as consumers, but also as producers, so everyone who is part of the food chain and making it function and alive, I think the first and foremost important aspect is the financial one. Because if you are making enough profit to get you through the weeks, the years, and to enable a good quality of life for yourself and for your family, it means that you can ensure sustainability in the future. And it is then only logical that you take care of your environment, because those who work in the land or on the sea know that they depend on the environment. If you take care of the environment will kind of take care of you. So it's a cycle.
We're almost going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs here. And when I hear you speak, I also look at food from a consumption element. So the food brand is exposed to us both in-home consumption, in hotels, in restaurants, in catering establishments, so on and so forth. In your role as ambassador, as a thematic ambassador, which is obviously linked to the knowledge sharing of branding, what do you strive to promote in order to make sure that people have this respect to the food brand? Also, if I may, in line with the ESG principles that are coming into force, maybe a bit more evidently in 2025.
You rightly point out that our role is that of thematic ambassador, and what does it mean? We are kind of bridges between the science and the policy making, which is translating knowledge into bites of information that can, first of all, influence and hopefully change people's behavior towards something more positive, and can continue to drive this message that you are speaking about, Jonathan. And you use a word which is really close to my heart, respect. Because when I think about sustainability, I think about respect. You need to have respect for other people and the effort and the passion that they are putting in, respect for the environment and the impact that we have on this environment, which is our home, our planet.
Absolutely,
I mean,
yes.
The environment is not something far away that you know, people who are fanatics need to take care of. If we look at ourselves as part of the larger chain of what goes on in the biological world, all animals take care of their environment, so we shouldn't be the exception. So it's all about respect and responsibility.
Sonia, besides mentioning respect, we also talk about responsibility, and you mentioned the word chain. Now, I believe a lot that a marketeer should look at the customer journey, but should also look at the holistic element of what contributes to the brand environment. And definitely in the food element, there is the supply chain and transparency in terms of supply chain. How transparent should the brand be? Should a brand be? Whether it's in HoReCa, whether it's in home, so on and so forth, when it comes to its supply chain practices?
That's a tricky question, I think, Jonathan, because...
We're not going to put you on the spot here, but we're trying to.
No, I'm obviously representing the commercial brands. So when you speak about supply chain and the transparency, kind of, there's a limit. It's a balance. I think it's a question of a balance. To what extent do you expose, you know, all the practices and the chain? For example, when it comes to the raw materials that you're using, the recipes, the processes, the practices, some of them are even covered by intellectual property. And some of these practices, and even suppliers, should be kept secret in order not to compromise, obviously, your competitive position. So this is why it's kind of a balance, and there is... some aspects where you need to be as transparent as possible, because that is what drives the respect and the trust that we are speaking about. But then other aspects that you need to kind of shield a bit away from consumers. And this reminds me of a promotional campaign. So as a thematic ambassador, I am part of a network of EU ambassadors for organic farming, and we meet periodically to share best practices and so on. And in one case, we were shown this promotional campaign, I think it was in Spain, where they were promoting organic products as fully transparent, so see-through food. So you see the fish with all the spines
And the bones and
so on,
whatnot.
the bones
Okay.
and so, and even things that are packaged in cans. You
Okay.
see through. And the idea behind it, it's very, very powerful, is we have nothing to hide.
It's very deep.
So again, in the modern age, we have access to tools and technology, and you can test products and so on. Before science brought us these tools, we relied on our senses. So if you smell food that is off,
Sensory approach, okay.
so it guards you, it defends you against taking in food which can harm you. So our senses are our first kind of line of protection. But how much do you rely, so how much do you trust the supplier, the company, the enterprise to deliver you food that is safe, nutritious, free from, and so on? And how much is it reflecting that promise again in the way it is bringing together all the components of the supply chain? I think it's a very powerful tool that the brand, that the company can use in order to build this aspect of trust with its consumer, the element of transparency.
I think that's a very good advice to people like us who are involved in integrated marketing communications. Because ultimately, what a marketer should do is communicate as transparent as possible the value proposition of a brand. But then there is also an element of environmental impact. Obviously, people like us are involved a lot in packaging, for instance, in producing material that will package food. How should the brand agencies like us work in order to minimize this environmental impact from a packaging point of view, from a production point of view, from a marketing activation point of view? How should we act?
Again, another of those areas where you really need to strike the balance. But it's inevitable that you put some packaging on a product, because think of it the other way. The products which don't have packaging don't lack the visibility and lack the distinction in the market. I often hear people who say, I am motivated to buy local. And in fact, our studies, we did a very small survey which looks at consumer preferences.
Okay.
And one of the questions was, do you try to choose local or non-local across different categories of foods? And there is an overwhelming majority in favor of local. But then people tell me, how do I make sure that the carrots I am buying, the cabbage I am buying, if I want to go for local, is actually from local? It does not have a package. It does not have a sticker. So we need to move towards products which, it doesn't need to be elaborate. It doesn't need to be heavy packaging. It doesn't need to be packaging that has a harmful impact on the environment. But I think, again, it's a question of striking the right balance and offering consumers some kind of visibility. So it's about making the product more visible in a way that does not compromise on quality, including environmental quality.
You mentioned your consumer perception survey that you mentioned. I don't know if you've looked at it, but a very big chunk of the branding communications is also customer education, right? In terms of educating the customer at the initial stages of their consumer purchase behavior about a particular product or a brand. How much value should we put to this? Should we give to it, to the educational
element? I myself am not a great believer of, I think it's the word rather than the process. When people speak about education, in my mind, I have this image of someone telling others, this is how you should feel. It's not just the level, it's also the way in which kind of we perceive it. To me, it's more like a conversation, even when I am in class, which is one of my favorite spaces. It's a two-way process.
Okay.
So I believe more in the power of communication about values, about information and facts that come with a product, with a brand, and a process that allows more of the discovery rather than, this is what I know or this is what I believe, and I am trying to push it in your mind. So it's also a childlike approach. Children have more curiosity, or at least their curiosity has not been,
Some of no boundaries, right?
has not been limited yet. But I think it's very, again, important for a brand to have this component of information and communication and conversation going on with its consumers. Who are we? What are we about? What is the vision that we aspire to? Are you interested to become part of this overall vision? And it is also what I try to do also in my team. I also look at what the different motives of people are, because people are working in a particular sector, but they might have different motivations that drive them. For example, as we are mentioning, some might be more interested in seeing environmental targets and protection. Like, for example, even when you speak about organic farming, you can look at it purely from an environmental point of view. The idea of having more care for the soil, more care for the biodiversity, and so on. But then there's another aspect, which is by not using pesticides or by not using certain harmful pesticides, you are protecting the health of the farmer himself. You are also making sure that your end product is completely free, so not only within the regulatory limits. So people's motivations, you put them together, and they will form this holistic vision. And I think the key word there is passion. It's like you have your recipe, your ingredients, and with everyone's motivations, you have a central vision that then forms this powerful story or narrative behind the brand, and that people can feel that they are part of. I think it's the buy-in, it's the contribution.
I love what you said about the word discovery. Typically, we use customer feedback, but I think the word discovery is so powerful. So, with your permission, we'll probably integrate it in our shopper marketing journey, because I think it's much more engaging than just feedback. And talking about feedback, again, going back to our first question, to the macro environment and the community as a whole and the community engagement. In what ways should a food brand engage with local communities or support local farmers? That's the first question. And the last question will be, how much, or rather, should food brands in Malta be looking to collaborate with organizations in order to achieve recognition, for instance?
Again, we're talking about different connections now. So I'll try to split it, and please remind
Repeat it if need be.
No, remind me. So I think the first part was about the engagement of brands with, for example, farmers.
And local organizations and stakeholders.
So different actors. And we're talking about the chain, where the consumer is right in the middle. So nowadays, we don't use the idea that you have a linear kind of chain with producers and traders and processors and retailers, and ultimately it's the consumer. No, the consumer sits right in the middle and everything revolves around them, and rightly so. So a brand must also position itself in that core area. One of the things that I have been, again, discovering more and more lately is that this is different from what happens in other countries. And it is strange because the distances and the areas and here are shorter, so we should have an advantage. But in reality, we are disconnected. So companies who are handling food, processing, catering food, delivering it, and so are somewhat disconnected from the producers, the farmers, the fishermen. And the reason is it's a system which is rather complex and sometimes a bit obscure as well. And one of the roles which we're very, very eager to take up and to promote and to drive as much as possible is this connection. Establishing or bringing back to life or shining a really bright spotlight on where the product is coming from.
Okay, the sourcing.
The origin, the supply. But the supply in terms of the person, the hands who have worked it. And you can do this in different ways. One of them is through local, for example, farm-to-fork stories, where you show the process. We have heard a lot, especially lately, about the concept of farm-to-fork and a lot of strategies around that. But when you zoom in and try to describe how it really works in your, I was going to say in your locality, in your hometown, in your home space, because we're talking about what touches us as what is familiar to us. It all brings
what
memories
is home to us,
of what
is such
happens
a powerful,
and what used to happen even as a child, because that is what you build the rest of your life. It's not just through exploration. It's these memories of a home environment in which there was this use of local products and cooking and the family coming together and so on. So the power of the narrative, but also tools which are very interesting and again are linked to the whole concept of organic farming and strengthening the organic food chain, which are the concepts of having biotrails and biodistricts. And I think biotrails is much simpler to understand. It's a connection, it's a short chain made up of different actors, of different operators, and they don't need to be operating in the same space or in the same type of production. So we're not just looking at horizontal integration, but more a vertical type of approach. And then they can be used as nodes of engagement, as you're saying, Jonathan, but also as points of attraction for tourism, for more conscious consumption, for more appreciation of the local product, and ultimately this all translates into better value. So they have different benefits, so to speak, to sell.
Sonya, I would like to thank you, because I think thanks to you, we actually ended the year on a responsible note, which I think is important. So a brand lives up to its purpose. And I think definitely something which is so close to heart and so close to our daily lives, as you mentioned, whether it's for survival, whether it's for enjoyment, whether it's for work, whether it's for pleasure, the element of responsibility from this customer journey approach, I think, is so important. So thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. Thank you for hosting us in this beautiful space.
You're welcome.
And we wish you all the very best.
Thank you, Jonathan. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you very much.